Friends, as we stand post-election in a very contentious election and a time where our country is greatly divided, I have a very important message for you, and I'd like to share a historic moment in the Hasidic movement, the Chabad Hasidic movement, so I can share this message with you. This occurred right after, in 1798, right after the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, was released from prison after being in prison for 53 days. He was put into prison by religious Jews. Who very vehemently disagreed with the approach of Chabad, of what he stood for, and they went and slandered against the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, to the Russian government, which is one of the worst things a Jew can possibly do. And sometimes what happens is that someone, despite being a religious person, does things which are a pure expression of their own ego, and I'm going to be right and I'm going to show you that you're wrong, to the extent that they literally put the Alter Rebbe's life in danger. He could have easily been killed in Tsarist Russia, right? Miraculously he wasn't, and after 53 days he was released. And after he was released, he wrote a letter to his Hasidim, and the letter that he wrote is unbelievable. Every one of us needs to know this letter, especially today. And that is a letter that focuses on a verse that our forefather Jacob said when he was meeting his brother Esau after many, many years, and his brother Esau wanted to kill him. And he says to God, "Kotointi mikol hachasodim umikol ha'emes." God, I have become diminished, I've become small from all of your kindness and from all of the truth that you have served me. And the Alter Rebbe explains something really beautiful, that when a person is raised higher and higher, and when I say higher here, I mean higher, closer to God, closer and closer to God. The Alter Rebbe says the way you know that you're getting closer to God is if as you get closer, you feel smaller. The closer one gets to God, who is an infinite being, the smaller and more humbled one becomes. The only way a person can feel a greater sense of self is when they are further from God. The closer you get to the infinite awesomeness of God, the smaller you feel. And so Jacob was saying, God, I feel so humbled and so small from all that you have done for me. I've seen your presence with me so strongly and clearly that I feel humbled and small. And therefore I don't know that I merit anything, because he became so diminished in the fact that God became so present in his life, which is a really beautiful sentiment. And the Alter Rebbe explains that the exact opposite happens to someone who is arrogant. The more kindness God shows them, the more they actually feel elevated and big themselves, feeling like, oh, look what I'm worthy of and what I deserve. And what that does actually is it doesn't bring them closer to God. They become further and further from God. This is a choice that every one of us always gets to make when God serves us. So we have this, and therefore he said, his message was that he said to his Hasidim, you're going to encounter the opposition, the Jews who are opposing the Hasidic movement and who put me into jail. I was almost killed because of it, right? These are not the explicit words that the Alter Rebbe writes, but he's conveying this message, and he's saying, do not open up your mouth and say, you see we were right, you see we won. Don't say a word to them. Why? Because if we're being humbled by the kindness of God that I was released from prison, then we say less. We don't say more. We don't feel we don't feel arrogant now that God has done this for us. On the contrary, we feel humbled by the greatness of God, and therefore we are diminished. Our presence is much smaller than beforehand. Whichever side of this political arena you are on, right? You either are on the winning side or on the losing side, we'll call them, right? And if you're on the winning side, and this is true for someone who's on the losing side as well, but if you're on the winning side, you have a choice, and that is to use that arrogantly, which creates more problematic circumstances in our society, or humbly by saying, thank you, God, and being quiet to anyone else, and not using that as a greater barrier between and a greater lack of unity in the country. This is the challenge that lies before every single one of us. And we must take the humble path. We must stand before God, feel a greater presence of God and less of a presence of ourselves. And this ultimately is exactly what our country needs.